Now, say it's manifested spiritually because it was Isha that got deceived, but a false belief comes from the absence of physical worship. It comes from the absence of knowing why you believe what you believe. When Isha was there to be tempted, she was alone. She was off on her own. But by the time he caught up with her, she had already taken the fruit down, and she showed it to him, and she fed him this doctrine, and he started to eat as well. Now, what this represents to us, not only an initial separation from Elohim by the lifting off of Mashiach, which is the anointing of Yahweh, they recognized that they were naked, but also a dependency on the self to provide the stability and the wealth. Fig leaves in Judaic thought or Hebraic thought represent plenty. They represent prosperity. They represent stability. But they also represent covering up for something. So it represents a false worship, a dependency on the self. All roads and all worship lead to God. But if we go back up here to James, he said, with whom there is no variableness. When we look at that, Elohim said, I am Yahweh and I do not change. Read that at Malachi chapter 3, verses 5 and 7, that say, and I shall draw near to you for right ruling, and I shall be a swift witness against the practicers of witchcraft, and against them that swear on falsehood, against those who and the sojourner, and not Yahweh of hosts, I shall not change, and you, O son of Jacob, shall not come to an end. From the days of your fathers you have turned aside from my decrees and did not guard them. That's the word shamar that we talked about in one of the Watchmen. Turn back to me, and I shall turn back to you, said Yahweh of hosts. But you said, in what shall we turn back? And it goes on to say that you're robbing me. And then we have the great tithe misconception. You got to give a tithe. It says so in Malachi. It says so in the Bible. When it says a tenth, it's you are to give of all of your strength, with all of your heart, with all of your soul. And that's literally what it's talking about in that 10th part. The yod, your strength. We also look at Ezekiel chapter 5, and this is verses 5 and 6. And these are these afterthoughts that you get when you're reading through it for the umpteenth time, and you say, I forgot to say anything about this. But Ezekiel 5, 5 and 6, that says, is it 5? Ezekiel 5, let me see, am I in the right place? Ezekiel 5, 5 through 6. Thus said Master Yahweh, this is Jerusalem, which I have placed in the midst of the Gentiles, with the lands all around her. But she rebelled against my right rulings, doing wickedness more than the Gentiles, and my decrees more than the lands around her. For they have rejected my right rulings, and they have not walked according to my statutes, my ordinances, my decrees. Why do we not walk according to the Torah of Elohim today? Because we have 1,800 years on one side that has drawn us away in another direction. We have over 2,500 years that have taken us in another direction on the Jewish side. So something to keep in mind, that when he says that the word that comes down, every perfect gift that comes down from above, from the Father of lights, there is no variableness. There is no gray areas. It's black and white. It says, do this and don't do that. So, anyway,
Michael,
yes?
back in
Ish and Isha? Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And Isha is the woman, the word there is Isha, that she was swayed. She took the fruit, and she gave it to her husband, and her husband ate. And he set the precedent in worship. But it has to come from somewhere. The idea has to start somewhere. Now, it isn't the physical body that needs redemption and restoration. It's the physical act of worship itself that is manipulated by the Satan that does. 10 simple commandments were given to the children of Israel. They were too distracted to listen, and as a result, they would never truly come to the true physical worship of Yahuwah their Elohim. And we look at Jeremiah to get an idea of this. And this is Jeremiah 7:22 through 23. He says, this is Yahuwah speaking, "For I did not speak to your fathers, nor commanded them in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices. But this thing I commanded them, saying, Obey my voice, and I will be your Elohim, and you shall be my people. And you walk in all the ways that I have commanded you, that it may be well for you." There were 10 commandments given. And before they were given, they were all excited, and they said, "Whatever Elohim says, that we will do." And he comes down the Shekinah on the mount, and the thunder and the lightning and the shofar is blasting, and they're supposed to listen to his voice in the shofar. And he gives these 10 reasonable commandments, and they go to Moses and they say, "We can't hear this. This is too much for us. We're going to die. You're going to have to listen for us and tell us what he says." So at that point, Moses is commanded to go up into the mountain to begin to get some of the Torah. And he comes back, and he brings them the portion of the Torah that he's gotten, and he reads it to them. And they say, "Everything that Elohim says, that we will do." He says, "Good. I'm going back up to get the rest of it." And he goes back up to get the rest of it. And while he's back up there doing the rest of it, because they didn't pay any attention the first time where he said, "Anochi Yahuwah Elohecha," I am Yahuwah your Elohim. You will not have any Elohim before me. They collect the earrings, the golden earrings, and make a golden calf. So, anyway, then we go back down to this verse 24 in Jeremiah. It says, "But they hearkened not," they didn't listen, "nor inclined their ear, but walked in the counsels and in the imagination of their evil heart, and went backwards and not forwards." Moses comes down with a set of tablets that tells them how to build the tabernacle, how to do the initial sacrifices, talks about Shabbat and all this other good stuff. They're partying with the golden calf, and he breaks the tablets. And he goes back up after not very pleasant things happen, and he goes back up to get the second set of tablets, and when he comes back down, the second set of tablets contain something much stricter, because they contain within them the Levitical law, that now, if you transgress in any way, shape, form, or fashion, and you don't offer a sacrifice exactly the way you're supposed to offer it, you will be put to death. When he said, "If you will obey my voice, then I will be your Elohim, and you will be a people set apart to me, a treasure. You will be a Kohanim to the world. You will be the ministers and the teachers that take my word to the world. Under the order of Melchizedek, you will do it out of faith because you love me and I love you. We have a relationship." But we didn't do that, or they didn't do that. We got settled with it. So a Levitical system, a Levitical priesthood was initiated, much stricter, and carried a curse of death for any transgression that took place. So anyway, they hearkened not to his voice. They moved backwards and not forwards. So, the Satan is the master of to and fro, so to speak. Is everybody totally confused, or is everybody with me so far? Okay, good. So, verse 9, and Aaron shall present the goat upon which the lot fell for Yahuwah and offer him for a sin offering. This is where they physically kill the goat and they offer it for the sin offering, and they split it up the way it's supposed to go. But the goat on which the lot for the Azazel fell shall be set alive before Yahuwah to make atonement over him, to send him away for the Azazel into the wilderness. And we read further on that the high priest puts his hands on the goat and transfers the sins of the people onto the goat and sends it off. And this is where the idea that we were talking about earlier, transference, he sends it off with a fit man out into the wilderness to be forgotten. The spiritual garbage that we have brought upon ourselves because of our false worship is also going to be thrown away and forgotten. Everybody with me? Okay. So, the book of John tells us that the word of Elohim became flesh, and that the Word made his tabernacle among us. Yahshua came as both the physical manifestation of the Word, the milta. The word milta is an Aramaic word that means word, but it also means manifestation. And when we read that in Aramaic, we read, in the beginning was the manifestation of the Word. And the manifestation of the Word was with Elohim, and the manifestation of the Word was Elohim. So, but as the manifestation of the Word, the milta, he contained within himself the spiritual manifestation of both the Ruach of Yahuwah as well as the physical and the spiritual side of the Adam. So with this in mind, we travel again to Yahuwah Yireh, that at this time in history is known as Golgotha. It is here that we're going to consider the words of Yahshua at the Tav. You know, we can call it a cross, you can call it a stake, you can call it a tree. Regardless of what it was the Tav. It's where he became the vehicle of sacrifice to clear up a mess that we had made. So, but we're going to consider the words of Yahshua at the Tav. We're going to consider each of the sentences that Yahshua spoke, and in them we'll find that as the ram that took our place at the Tav, he also offered up the goat before Yahuwah for the redemption and restoration of our physical existence and worship, as well as the Azazel for the redemption and restoration of our spiritual side. We say, Shema Yisrael, Yahuwah Eloheinu, Yahuwah Echad. Hear, O Israel, Yahuwah our Elohim, our Yahuwah is Echad. He is one. Echad also means to be in agreement with. I'm probably getting ahead of myself a little bit, but Echad is also, the numerical value is 13, which is the same ordinal value is the mem, which represents the word. But we talked about in the beginning, and the ram, and the one ram, which is said in that verse 5, which is ve'ayil echad. Ve'ayil echad. And in this, we also see something in the future, that the ayil, the ram, is to become flesh, and he is echad. He is in agreement with Yahuwah and his word. So we see a little inkling of Yahshua over and over and over in this story about the two goats, one of them for Yahuwah and one of them for the Azazel. But anyway, the lots were cast. The physical and spiritual redemption and restoration of the Adam was about to take place. They parted his garments into the goat and to the Azazel. Yahshua begins his discourse by pleading with the Father on our behalf for our ignorance, not only at this time, but our ignorance in the garden, as well as our ignorance in the future. He said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He told the Samaritan woman, you worship, but you don't understand. And they parted his garments and cast lots. At this point, we have the goat for Yahuwah and the Azazel. We continue at John 19:26 through 27. When Yahshua therefore saw his mother and the Talmud standing by, whom he loved. Talmid is the Aramaic word for disciple. We'll learn in a minute that it means a little bit more than simply a disciple. He said to his mother, Woman, behold your son, Isha hine benu, or benechem, actually. Then he said to the Talmid, Behold your mother. And from that hour the Talmid took her to his own home. So recall that we are lenefesh chaya, an existing or living soul with the capacity to learn. Note that Yahshua speaks to the Talmid, which is an Aramaic word that is used for one who is taught and retains teaching. Aramaic, like Hebrew, is a very explanatory language. It literally means one who is taught but retains the teaching. Whom he loved. The word for love is achabah, that as a word holds a gematria of 13, which is the same gematria as the word echad, that means not only one, but also to be in agreement with. And the 13th letter of the Aleph Beit is Mem, that as soon as we turn the page, we'll find out what it means. Mem is the letter that is a representation of the living water that is the word of Yahuwah. So the Talmid is one who learns to be in agreement with the word out of love and reverence. Now, when Yahshua said to his mother, Behold your son, he wasn't just taking care of his mom because he wasn't going to be around. This is something very special that we find within the Aramaic Hebrew of this, that he was speaking to his mother, Am, and telling her not just to look at him, but to pay special attention to him. What did Ish and Isha lose in the garden after the transgression? Well, they lost fellowship, but they lost the anointing of Yahuwah. It pulled up off of them. They had to make fig leaves to cover that up. They began to depend on themselves. That anointing was no longer there. They were naked. So the word for woman is Isha, or the letters. The closed mem represents the anointing and the word of Yahuwah. When we see a closed mem, it usually refers to Mashiach. And then we have the aleph that refers to Yahuwah. That in the word for woman, Isha, we are considering the spirit of the Adam. Then what is happening in this verse is the restoration of the anointing and the word back to the spirit of the Adam. And we learn and retain what is learned according to the teaching and guidance of the Ruach of Yahuwah. We have to have the anointing of Yahuwah in order to be able to receive from the Ruach. Without it, there's nothing to ignite, to open our eyes to see what the Word has to say. Now this is the one who will believe and receive. In verse 27, we see this process reversed, in that the one who believes and receives, learns and retains, will again become conscious of the Ruach by and through the anointing and the word of Yahuwah in their spirit, and thus bring it into their lives, in other words, into their home. The original spiritual condition of the Adam, of humankind, was restored here at the Tav. Now, at Luke 23:43, we read about the second criminal that asked Yahshua to remember him when he returned to the Father. And Yahshua said unto him, I say to you today. That means I'm telling you today. We're having this conversation right now. I'm not saying that it's going to happen today. We're having today, right now I'm telling you. Today, you will be with me in. Now the word for paradise in both the Hebrew and the Aramaic of this Eden, meaning in the Garden of Eden. By his physical death, entry back into the Garden of Eden would once again be opened to those who Elohim, worship in spirit and in truth, and believe and receive the word, and walk forth as the son of Adam, and as the vehicle of sacrifice made possible by and through the physical shedding of his blood. That's a mouthful. But what he's saying here is not only am I going to restore the anointing of Yahweh back to you, I am also opening the door to Eden. Up until this time, there's been a cherubim with a really, really rad sword that goes around in circles and lights up in the way, so nobody can get in. But now here, at the Tav, he will also reopen that for us. Now, the next words spoken by Yahshua are found in Matthew 27:46. And about the 9th hour, Yahshua cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is to say, my Elohim, why have you forsaken me? In most of our King Jimmy Bibles and most of our modern translations. This is a Greek interpretation of an Aramaic phrase. It would actually read, why have you spared me? In this verse, we see the flesh, the physical part of the man Yahshua crying out. Yahshua is saying, why is this taking so long? Now, I want you to understand that death at the Tav, and literally we could call it death at the Tav, the Roman vehicle of sacrifice at this time was not this. It was more of, you had the stipes, and the person that was fixing to be hung up on this thing, crucified, would carry something called the patibulum that was a really, really big, like a railroad tie looking thing. And they would carry it, and they would nail him to it, and then they would lift him up, and then he would be like this. It looks like a T. This particular type of cross in Roman history in 3 AD is called the Tav. It's called the Tau. And this is where they would put him up, and they would nail him here, and then they would nail his feet here. And what happens in crucifixion is when they put your feet in the certain form that they put it, it causes automatic instant Charlie horses in the back of your calf muscles that you can't get rid of. You're pulling down so you can fill your lungs with air, but the only way to get them to unfill with air is by pushing yourself back up so you can breathe out. And what happens is people usually died from exhaustion and from bleeding out because the scourge wasn't simply taking a little cat of nine tails and beating them. They had these leather tongs, or whatever you want to call them, leather thingies, and they would dip them in goat's blood, and then dip them in sand and broken pottery, and they would whip it around until it whipped around the person and stuck, and then they would twist it so it would tear into somebody, and then they would rip pieces away. I want you to understand that this was not pleasant. They either died from exhaustion or they bled to death, sometimes before they ever got here. Sometimes they just crucified dead people. But the act of living on this thing was excruciating. And it should have been us up there, but Yahshua did it for us. So he's saying, why is this taking so long? This is the physical part of Yahshua crying out that, I lost my place here. that it's an example of how our physical side would suffer if we did not have a relationship with Elohim, how our spiritual side would suffer as well without a relationship with Elohim. It's an image of what life without Yahweh Elohim is. Our physical side suffers even if we don't realize it. We suffer illness, anxiety, depression, and other physical ills. When we talked about leprosy, we said that 95% of the population isn't impacted by leprosy. We're not contagious to 95% of the population. But when you reverse that, spiritual leprosy affects 99%. With what the Jewish sages say, there's only 36 truly righteous people in the world, and if they all died off, then Elohim would destroy the world. But we might ask ourselves the same question: why does it take so long for me to die to the carnal self so that I can be totally in the presence of the Father in my day-to-day, feeling healthy and vibrant? I don't know y'all, but do you ever transgress and beat yourself up for it? So imagine doing that but not having the presence of the Father there. Physical being without the Word. In John 19:28, we read, "After this, Yahshua, knowing that all things were now accomplished, that the Scriptures might be fulfilled, said, I thirst." And that kind of threw me for a loop. I asked myself, why would Yahshua thirst? He was the Word. He was the living water. But the physical side of the Adam, when it entered into false worship, became devoid of the Word of Yahweh by and through sin. Here, the physical side of the Adam that Yahshua took on also took on the sin of all of humankind, past, present, and future. Yahshua literally dried up spiritually because of the rebellion of the physical side of the Adam, and as such, the physical side cried out, I thirst. Now, we can say that, yes, physiologically, that he was dehydrated and getting big inside of the cardiac sac, and pericardial tamponade was taking place and all this other stuff. And this would make somebody thirsty. But we have to understand beyond our physical ability to perceive that what was dying here was our see it only from our point of view, see it only from our carnal point of view mentality. After this, Yahshua said, Nagmar. It's the last thing he said. Well, next to the last thing he said that was me the thing. Nagmar, it is accomplished. At the same time that he was saying Nagmar at the Tav, the high priest at the temple was also yelling out, Nagmar, it is accomplished, as the last lamb was slain before the Passover. Yahshua understood that the physical restoration of the Adam was accomplished. So there was one more thing to do. He had to offer up the Azazel. Yahshua would now make it his final earthly statement, and with that statement would free humankind from the spiritual bondage of the Satan, restoring the spiritual side of the Adam back to a relationship with the Father. And at Luke 23:46, we read about that. And when Yahshua had cried with a loud voice, he said, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. And having said this, he gave up the spirit. He offered himself up for the physical side, but he also had to take care of the spiritual side. All in all, Yahshua spoke 7 times at the Tav. 7 is the numerical value of the letter Zion. And when we consider the blood on the doorposts and the lintel, We also consider the blood shed by Yahshua for us, and that the blood forms the letter Chet. When we looked at this at